Artist, scientist. You can only be one, right? I am both a scientist and an artist. So today we're going to talk about why art and science are super important and should be together and are not separate entities. Since she keeps coming into the frame, here is Ophelia. This is the cat tax for everyone. Thank you, Ophelia. She might have much to say today because she's very active. So oftentimes people think of science as being very separate from art, which is interesting because many departments have an entire college dedicated to the arts and the sciences. But people always think, oh, those don't connect with each other. You can't be both at the same time. I've even had people say, oh, you're gonna be a scientist? That's such a shame because you're putting your art skills to waste. Or I've had the opposite version where I've had people suggest that I should do science illustration instead, because oftentimes people think that you cannot do both, but you can. The thing about being a scientist is that you are, in fact, a human, and humans have hobbies, they have other interests, they have other skill sets outside of being a scientist. And one of the things that I'm really excited about when I do science communication is talking about how we are also people. It's not just someone who's locked away in a lab somewhere and that's all they do and they live at school like many of us might have thought when we were kids. Many of us have many other interests outside of science and many other skills outside of science. And you can use those skills that you have to incorporate into your science or vice versa. You're very cute right now, Ophelia. Also, sometimes this really negative stigma in the sciences where if you're somebody that is a scientific illustrator, for example, or someone who does science art, that you're compensating for your scientific ability, which is just not the case. You have to understand your science intimately to do science art, especially for like illustration or if you're making educational videos. The reality is that art has been inherent to science from the beginning. Disseminate information about different organisms. They didn't have cameras hundreds of years ago. The only thing that they could do was illustrate them. If you wanted to tell other scientists or the general public about some type of organism, so an organism might be something like a plant or an animal or a fungi, you had to illustrate it because they didn't have any other options. You can also look into the work of Beatrix Potter. She's more well known for the Peter Rabbit books, but she was also very interested in fungi and had some interesting ideas about how it might have reproduced, and she made all of these illustrations, but they are so important now for us to understand the contributions of different types of people besides men, for example, in the sciences. In the past, art was valued as a part of science, and now sometimes we tend to see them, as we've been saying, as separate entities, and they're not. So nowadays, we have cameras. With the invention of cameras, we could see organisms more clearly, potentially, depending upon the quality of the camera, and having access to a camera to film, for example, animals behaving in the wild, game-changing. Those are things that you can't necessarily illustrate as well as you can film on a camera. So now we have lots of different tools at our disposal, but not everybody uses them or they don't think of it as art. I'm gonna go through a couple of different media that I use to illustrate my science and to illustrate science in general and to help with science education. And it might also give you some ideas about how you can do science art even if you're not a scientist. So perhaps the easiest science art that's out there is photography. And I say easiest because it's the most accessible. If you have a phone, you have a camera. I'm filming this currently on a Canon 5D Mark IV, but I had a different camera previously. This was my first camera. I had the Canon 60D, and then I often use the 50mm 1.4 lens, which I also have on the camera that's currently recording. Both of these are They're old and they were showing their age, and so I had to retire both of them. But I was able to use this camera to take video, to take photographs, so that way I could disseminate the organisms that I was seeing, the ecosystems that I was observing, to film things that people might not have paid attention to previously, and to essentially explain my science. This was a nice camera because it has the back, if I can get it open. So it had this that I could flip around if I needed it to, and I could like move it in different ways, which unfortunately the 5D Mark IV does not have, but it's fine, I guess. It does have a touch screen, which is nice. But photography is something that is so accessible, and you don't necessarily need to have a big fancy camera to do that. So I had this camera for 10 years. I don't remember how much I paid for it, but I bought it in high school. And then 2 years ago, I think it was, yeah, I bought the Canon 5D Mark IV. So I upgraded after 10 years from this to the beefy camera that I have. But this was considered an, like, not an entry, but like semi-professional. And I was still able to get photographs that look so high quality. A lot of it has to do with the editing of the photos to make it look a specific way. And there are so many different styles of editing. Some people like to heavily edit their photographs. Some people will use presets. Some people won't edit at all. Some people will just kind of adjust some of the levels. It's up to you. It's up to the kind of appearance that you want. But this is not something that everybody wants to engage in or can afford. So it may be a little bit less accessible than, say, a phone. If you're not ready to make that jump, then you could just use your phone, and people have been able to get plenty of incredible photographs that they are able to use for scientific purposes using their phone. And there's different settings, different apps that you can use to get really cool photographs. So it's a thing that you can play with and you can try out if you are really interested in using your phone to create scientific art. I also do film photography. This is the Canon A1. There's also the Canon AE one that's super popular, but this is a better quality version than the Canon AE1. I love this thing. I got it for like $100 maybe? This is something that a lot of people watching this might chuckle and say, that's what I used to use, or we used to only have those, and they're coming back in style. I don't know if they've ever really faded in style, but film photography is certainly very popular right now. And what's fun about doing scientific art with a film camera is that it does give a very like specific look. The reason that I love film is that it captures moments, emotions, scenery in a way that you don't necessarily get on a digital camera, partially because of the color of film and because there are certain inconsistencies sometimes with film, or you might get a light leak, or like the way that the colors really meld with each other if you're shooting in color. Some people like to shoot in black and white. I don't typically like to shoot in black and white because I'm drawn to film because of the color, but you do you. But to me, it's a really interesting way to look at science or any kind of subject that you're photographing in a different light than what you might see on a digital camera. I always love to take this with me on all of my field excursions, and I especially love to take photographs of like people working, for example, in the field. I did this really cool series when I was in Chile doing my research where I photographed everybody that worked at the marine station, and then I overlaid it as what's known as a double exposure. It's where in a film camera, you take the photograph and then you don't advance the film and you take another photograph over top of it. And I did that to kind of show like these are the people and they are interlinked with the ocean that they're studying. You can also do this, you can't do it on the Canon 60D, but you can do it on the camera that I'm currently filming on, the Canon 5D Mark IV. But on some models of Canon, and I'm sure other cameras as well, there is a setting where you're able to do multiple exposures, so you can even do more than one, and you'll be able to see the photograph that you've taken, and then you can overlay it with whatever you want by using a live preview. I think it's really cool. I like using it even in just my like regular photography, but it can also be really an exciting way to explore science in a way that you wouldn't normally see it. Both film photography and digital photography have their pros and cons and their limits. This is usually a little bit cheaper for you to buy in the beginning, like to buy the actual camera itself, but then there's the film which you have to develop, and it can be expensive to get the film, it can be expensive to develop the film, whereas this is a very expensive early on investment most of the time, and then you don't have to pay for film, so that's nice. And then you can take as many as you want, and then you can also use the live preview because you can see the photograph that you're taking, whereas with your film camera, it's just you take it and you hope that it's good. But photography can be a really great way to show the organisms that you are studying if you're somebody that's a biologist. So a lot of this might be leaning a little bit more towards biology because that's what I do, but certainly there's chemistry, there's physics, there's computer sciences. You can do whatever kind of art you want with all of those things, but a lot of this is going to heavily lean towards the biology because that's what I do. You can get a lot of detail, especially if it's a smaller organism. You might use what's known as a macro lens to help you zoom in on that specimen. So for example, if you're trying to photograph a spider, you might need a macro lens. Or let's say you're a physicist and you want to show different types of waves, you could take photographs of those different waves. If you're wanting to check out a scientist that uses photography, you should look up Kai the Fish Guy on Instagram, Blue Sky. He has some incredible work, some of the most beautiful photographs of fish that I've ever seen, and he might be able to give you some inspiration. Video can also be a really powerful scientific tool that can help you illustrate your science. I use video all the time, every time that I go into the field, and you can see all of the videos here on my YouTube channel. I love to just film everything that I'm seeing to help bring other people in and understand what is the environment that I'm working in, who are the people that are involved in this work to help kind of humanize us a little bit more, what are the types of animals or plants or whatever that I'm seeing, what do I look at to show like what do I think is important when I'm a scientist. And also I just love cinematography and filming. A lot of the videos that are on here, I again filmed on my Canon 60D, which served me quite well for a long time. And again, I was talking about getting a camera like a DSLR can be quite a large investment, but they do have lots of great cameras out there that are not as expensive, or you can get one used, for example. And the main key is the lens. Your lens is the biggest part because you might be able to take certain types of photos or take certain types of videos with one lens, and it just doesn't look as good as it does with another lens. So your glass or your lens is very important. A lot of people will say that the body doesn't matter. This is not necessarily true in my personal experience. The difference between this camera and the one that I'm currently filming on, again, the Canon 5D Mark IV, is astronomical, especially in low light settings. So I'll show you an overlay of concert photography that I've done, where the concert photography that I took on the Canon 60D versus the concert photography that I've taken on the Canon 5D Mark IV feels totally different. And the Canon 5D Mark IV was exactly what I was looking for that sort of thing, and I just could not get that even though I had been shooting all of this time on the Canon 60D. I wasn't able to achieve the look that I was going for, and I achieved it immediately with the Canon 5D Mark IV. So there's some truth, obviously, to the body not being as important as the glass, but there is certainly some part of the body goes into play with what your image is going to look like. And then of course, there's differences between people who love Canon and people who love Nikon. I've used both Canon and Nikon, and obviously I'm a Canon girly. I like Canon more because to me it's more user-friendly, but some people swear by Nikon and they love it. It's up to you, whatever you want to do. Video can be a really great way to explore your science. Again, I mentioned earlier, if you're a physicist, you can show the waves on a video. Or if you're a chemist, you can show chemistry happening, or you can film somebody teaching about chemistry. And you can do this on a phone or you can do it on a camera. But sometimes video is able to capture something that photography can't because you can see it in live action and moving, and that can give you a little bit more context than a photograph might be able to. And of course, a lot of us who are scientists use video anyway as part of our science. For me, I did a lot of behavioral research during my PhD, and I used cameras all the time to be able to film this behavior. I wouldn't necessarily consider that scientific art, but I could still use the cameras that we were using for that to create scientific art. And documentary series such as BBC Planet Earth have been a great way of showing general audiences what's out there, what kind of organisms we have on this planet. And when you're able to actively see something moving in real time, or you're able to get, again, a fuller perspective that you're able to get using video, audiences may be able to grasp that a little bit more because they can make a connection to it. They feel like they understand it more because they can see it. Video can be a little bit trickier than photography. Again, photography is a lot more accessible to create science art than it is for video, but I really love doing video. And you can use lower end, quote unquote, equipment in order to film your videos. For example, you can use an iPhone or a Samsung or whatever to film videos in a way that is cinematic. There are plenty of people that are out there that are doing this. You can just look on YouTube, you can look on TikTok, anywhere, and see people doing this. Editing can be kind of a pain. I use Premiere Pro, other people like to use DaVinci Resolve. It's whatever you want to do. There's a learning curve when you're trying to do it, especially like color grading, for example, is tricky for me and for a lot of other people. But once you learn how to do it, it's not that bad. And I get really excited when I see the things that I've created using video. And as someone who grew up loving nature documentaries, it's really cool to be able to create my own and to be able to see my science manifested in a way that other people can see it as well, and see it in the same way that I'm seeing it. Because when you're filming something, especially if you're trying to make specific choices about the angles, how close in you are, what's going on in the foreground versus the background, you're making decisions that show how you look at things, and then you're able to transfer how you look at it to other people, which I think is really exciting, because all of my videos are essentially showing people this is how I see the world, and I'm trying to give you a piece of that, which is part of why I really love filming videos so much. I want to take a moment to talk about GoPros. A lot of biologists use these for their research, but they also take honestly incredible video. I have used the GoPro Hero 5 for years. That's what all of this footage is filmed on, but they have much higher. I think it's up to GoPro 13 now, and you can still get one that's cheaper and get quality video and photographs as well to show people what's underwater. Especially, they're really easy to use and easy to carry around, and if you get an older one, it can be relatively inexpensive, and again, they can also take really great photographs. Another really important part of science art that I've talked about already is scientific illustration. Scientific illustration has been around since we've had science. However, a lot of times now, people who do scientific illustration can be looked down upon by other scientists, which is wild considering how much we still need scientific art. But it's a great way to illustrate your science. You can illustrate the organism that you're studying or the concepts. It's also a way, like video, to make somebody see the science that you look at, but in the same way that you're looking at it. But scientific illustration can also be super useful. For example, when I was an undergrad, I had an invertebrate zoology course where one of our assignments was that we had to illustrate all of the specimens that we observed during our laboratory time. And this helped me immensely to learn what all of these different organisms look like, because I had to learn about the specific structures and I had to draw them the specific way. I had to draw their textures, and doing that helped me to really fundamentally understand what those organisms look like, how they function, the specific traits that they had, and it helped me to better remember them when I went and had the test. I did this during my undergraduate invertebrate zoology course, but I also did during my graduate level invertebrate zoology course. I don't have any of those images, sorry, so I can't show you those, but I did show you the ones that I did in undergrad. And it's an assignment that one day I hope to give to my students because, again, you learn so much when you have to illustrate it. Even if you think that you're not a good illustrator, forcing you to draw all of the little structures will make sure that you know what the structures are and where they're located. Scientific illustration can also be super helpful for taxonomy purposes. So taxonomy is the study of where all of the different organisms lie on the tree of life. And when you're trying to determine between different species, fish, for example, you might have to count how many scales they have along the lateral line. If you illustrate that, somebody can go in and count all of those scales to help them learn, oh, if it has this many scales, it's this species, but if it has this many scales, it's this species. Or, for example, with darter fish, they have different coloration during the breeding season versus during the non-breeding season, and you can illustrate these different colors, and then that helps people to know, oh, if I see it in this color, then that means that it's this species versus this specific species of darter. People also just love looking at illustrations. We adorn our houses with illustrations. People love to look at art. Scientific art might have someone's favorite animals on it, and so they order a print of it and put it in their house, and now they're more familiar with it because they get to see it every day. Scientific illustration can also be difficult, and it's a skill that has to be learned and practiced. And there's more than one way to illustrate. Some people use traditional media, which is what I use, so I predominantly use watercolors, but some people are able to do traditional media and they're able to do what's known as digital. So you might be somebody that's drawing on like an iPad or using a tablet to create digital illustrations, which are very popular right now. And all of these are valid ways to create scientific illustrations. If you're looking for someone who does cool scientific illustrations, you should check out Meg Mindlin, also known as Invertibabe. She has gorgeous, especially cephalopod themed illustrations that you can look through. Scientific illustration is also a really easy way to communicate scientific concepts because you can illustrate the multiple steps. For example, if you're talking about a specific cellular cycle, or if you're talking about a life cycle of an organism, if you draw each of the different stages, then it will make it easier for people to know what those stages of life are or what they look like, so that way they can identify it. Scientific illustration can also be a great way to condense information down and then have everything in one place. It can also be really useful to explore different species. You can have all of the different species of whales, for example, or all of the specific species that are found in southern Florida on the beach to help show people what's the difference between all of these different species to help them later identify it. You could illustrate different colors of experimental reactions. And overall, it's just a great way to connect with the general public, which I keep saying that, but they do so in different ways. A lot of people love to just look at art, and they don't necessarily realize that they're learning. You could expose them to an animal or a plant or whatever that they would have not seen otherwise if you had not illustrated it. There are many other different ways of doing science and art together. People have made movies that are science and art. You can write something if you're somebody who is a writer. Maybe you're a poet. Maybe you like to write science fiction novels. Science fiction can sometimes get into the realm of not real, but certainly there's been ways of getting people interested in science, even if the science in the piece of media is not accurate. Some people knit their art. For example, Leafhopper Knits is Meredith, and she makes arthropod-themed knitting patterns. You have to knit all of these ants or cicadas, and as you're doing that, you're gaining an appreciation for these different organisms that people might have maligned in the past. I know that she also includes facts about these different organisms in the knitting patterns, which is fun. There's no one right way or wrong way to do science art. You just need to do it. And it can be a way to express your excitement and celebrate science. They do belong together, even if people don't always understand that. And so I hope that this video kind of gave you some ideas about how you can do science art, even if you're not a scientist. Thank you for coming and watching, and stay tuned for more art stuff because I'm going to talk about art in the future. Okay, bye.